The good news is I talked to quite a few of you in the networking reception, and I think everybody's in the right room. It sounded like everyone's here for something that they're going to get value out of this presentation. So great job for registering for something that might have value for you. I'm going to just touch on our agenda really quick. So my role is really twofold, and I think these two roles are really what the center can do well outside of anywhere else. So we really bring this depth of theory to the table. So we spend, decades of our lives studying the psychology and the sociology of why people do the things they do. What makes them think, what makes them react, what emotions they feel, and how that drives behavior. And so we're going to give you some of this and what the foundation behind all of these engagement strategies really comes from. And then we take you through these 3 steps, and these 3 steps are really where you start to get data-driven insights. And so that's the other side of the center. So we have this huge theoretical base, and then we take data, and we turn that into some kind of information that's usable to your firm. And so we're going to talk about how to take both theory and data and turn that into a usable strategy for your company. And then I'll turn it back over to Rob, who can finish up with these last steps of converting that into action. So a very good segue. Is it Pascal? Because engagement has been used for everything in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, this word has exploded in marketing. So if you look on Google Trends, the word has been used in headlines double every 4 years. So every 4 years, the amount of times they say engagement in a headline doubles. And this is growing even as we speak. But what's even more interesting is that more and more firms are hiring directors of customer engagement. So they're literally looking for people just to manage this side of their business. And that's firms like, I'm going to talk about Budweiser quite a bit tonight. I'm from St. Louis, so home of Budweiser beer. And Budweiser has actually done a phenomenal job with one side of engagement, so this experiential side of engagement, so the side that Derek has touched on this whole first introduction. But then places like Enterprise and MasterCard, 2 incredibly different industries. So the financial industry and car rental industry are doing the same thing. So what's also unique about you guys in this room is that you're all from incredibly diverse industries. So we've got healthcare, we've got services, we've got not-for-profit, we've got beverage, we've got IT, and all of you are looking to answer the same question. How do you use customer engagement? Or some of you might just be here to say, what the heck is customer engagement? Everyone keeps saying it. My boss keeps telling me to go do it, and I have no idea what he actually means by this. So we're going to try to answer a couple of those tonight. There's a couple of reasons why this is actually happening. So one of the big reasons is that companies are switching from selling products to selling services. So Xerox has done this. They're no longer selling copy machines to companies. They're selling these solutions to companies, which means they're actually literally interacting with their customers on a much more frequent basis. So that's driving a lot of more engagement-based thinking. These next two, are actually driven by sort of the same thing. So we live in a technology-driven world. People are constantly on their phone. They actually have a term for nomophobia. Does anyone know what nomophobia means? It's a fear of being without your cell phone. People are literally diagnosed with this fear of being without their cell phone. And it's been a study that the majority of people, 60% of people, are never without being 4 feet away from their phone. How many of you think you could answer that? Like, I'm never without 4 feet, never further than 4 feet away from my phone for 23 hours of the day. Okay, we've got a few people who are being very, very honest. I mean, you use it for your... Never. So 23 hours a day was the study. So 23 hours a day, so you may go to the bathroom and you don't take it. Some of you are probably taking it to the restroom, so you are not even in that little category that does take it to the restroom. But yeah, this technology is actually driving a few things that are making engagement either more accessible or more of a desire for customers. So one of them is that people are so driven into this technology that they're looking for deeper connections, just deeper connections in general. And they're seeking some of this out of the products and the companies that they patronize. So they're actually going to find these really experiential events because they're lacking that in their everyday life. The second one is that people are on their phones constantly. So I just told you about nomophobia. They're interacting with other customers, and they're interacting with firms on this platform. So they're enabled. We have this totally enabled customer base talking to each other and talking to the firm. But there's something else that's happening with this too. So this mobile environment, this whole world of electronic communication, is the most trackable environment we've seen in our lifetimes. So every move you make inside that world creates a data point. And that data point can be insights for your firm. It can tell you who your customers are to such a degree that you will never be able to know them better than we can right now. But then all of this wouldn't really make sense unless you actually had benefits for the firm. So some of these benefits come from things like customer-centric products. So now that you have this wealth of information of who your customers are, how they're interacting with your brand, and how they're talking to other customers, you can use that, one, to design products around them. So you have this profiling of your customer. But two, you can use them for voice. They can literally tell you exactly what they want out of your product now. They can communicate with you directly as a firm. And that's a huge source of competitive advantage. So you have all these Me Too products. We live in a world where everything is reverse engineered and recreated for cheaper and for to a more accessible audience. And this is one way where you can kind of beat that curve. The second thing is, and a lot of what Derek was talking about, is that when someone creates this emotional connection with a brand, rational things like price play a much less significant role in decision making. So once you have this emotional connection, you're less worried about price. You're less worried about how much you're going to pay for that product. And these are two hugely beneficial things to companies. So before we go any further, let's just settle it and figure out what customer engagement is. Let's give a good definition of this. We are in a university, so we're going to give you a couple definitions. No exams. You guys are off the hook for that. And customer engagement is a firm's initiative to occupy the attention of a customer through interactions that are not the core transaction. So we used to live in this world of loyalty programs. And loyalty programs were tracking every transaction you made with the product. And then they would tell you how frequently you bought, when you bought, how often you would purchase that product. Now, we're looking at what you're doing outside of that transaction. We're creating this profile of who you are when you're engaging with the customer and you're not making a purchase. This is a huge amount of your interaction, and these two worlds are vastly different. So if you think about the old CRM programs, these ones that I was telling you, you're finding frequency, you're finding how big of purchases you're making. In 6 months, if you haven't made a purchase, you're typically purged from that database, and you're considered a lost customer. Say that same customer has come into the store every day for the last month. That's a very different data point. So what you thought was a lost customer is still someone very engaged with your brand. So this new world gives you this entirely different profile of who your customers are, and that's incredibly beneficial to you as a firm. So now we're going to talk about two basic forms of engagement. The first one is what Derek introduced to us, experiential engagement. This is a fundamentally different set of systems that actually drives this. So the reason we need to distinguish between these two is because they work through different systems, and they actually drive different outcomes. So we're going to talk about two different forms of loyalty that go with this. What's really cool about this, though, is if you deploy these correctly, they create these massive synergies. So they can explode their impact on your core offering. What's really scary, though, is if you deploy these incorrectly, they can be devastating. So they can break something very good for your brand that you had worked very hard to establish. So we're going to talk about these two. First one's experiential engagement. I talked about these two main systems that are driving this. This first one is called the social emotional system. We're going to get into these in a lot further detail. We're going to talk a lot about what goes on inside your brain and how you think and why you're doing things that you think are a little irrational sometimes. We're going to really kind of pick that apart in this presentation. And it leads to a specific type of loyalty, attitudinal loyalty. We'll get into this a little bit later also. So I told you, I promised you we'd talk about Budweiser quite a bit. How many of you have heard of the Up for Whatever campaign? How many of you are following this a little bit? Like just watching these commercials? Yeah, I would think Rebecca's following it a little bit. She came from Budweiser, from Coors, so she's been in this industry a little bit. So the Up for Whatever campaign is a very good example of experiential marketing. Budweiser actually has an entire team on contemporary marketing just meant to initiate these strategies. The second form of engagement is called activity-based engagement. This works on a very different subconscious psychological system, and it's called our cognitive regulatory system. These two systems are housed in the same part of your brain. They're both made for survival, but running very different structures in how you make decisions. This leads to behavioral loyalty, so a different form of loyalty. Still something desirable. Any kind of loyalty is really desirable loyalty, but something very different than attitudinal loyalty. And activity-based engagement are all these little touch points, these social media interactions that you're having with your brand, these conversations happening about your brand, all of these tiny little activities that you're trying to promote within your customer base. So before we get started and really get into the theory about things, I'm going to show you a big model. We really like big models when you get into academics, so we're going to start with this. Customer engagement really affects your performance through two main pathways. But we all start with this. We all start with a core offering where people can either assess it for your service quality or your product quality. So those are the two main things that people are assessing your core offering, what you're selling to the customer. These two things, you have to get these right before you can ever drive any loyalty, and these have a significant impact on your loyalty. You've got to have this great product for people to start buying it. And we're going to talk about these two forms of loyalty that I just introduced on the last slide, and then we're going to bring up this third form, which is kind of the holy grail of loyalty. So this is where you're reaching for right here, this true loyalty. And then finally, how we get to sales and profits, so your financial output. So the first way that engagement actually impacts your performance is directly. So it will directly drive loyalty and directly drive sales through these two systems. So this social-emotional system, some of the things that it's driving are things like emotional attachment. How many good feelings you have associated with that brand. Self-transformation. Now, this one's actually a very critical part of this. This idea that you can transform from a customer to a brand advocate. Those are very different psychologically inside the brain of your customer. So the way you view yourself in relationship to that brand is vastly different. And then what's really driving all of this is a set of very specific types of emotions. And emotions are incredibly powerful drivers of your behavior. And so we'll kind of talk about where these emotions came from and how important they are to your decision making. On the bottom, we've got activity-based engagement, driven through this cognitive regulatory system. This is going to be things like habits. So literally walking down the grocery store and grabbing what you always grab on that aisle in exactly that same spot, just like you did last Thursday. Customer learning. So this learned behaviors through your customers. And then top-of-mind awareness. So just a few handful of brands that come to mind anytime you think of a product category. But then this second pathway actually leverages the value of your core offering. So engagement has this amazing ability to transform what used to be a typical product into something a little bit more sacred. So Derek talks about all these drive experiences. So if you buy a BMW and you take it to work every Thursday, you have this sort of image in your mind of what that is to you. Or every day. Maybe you're not going to work just on Thursdays. Thanks, John. That was a very good catch. And then you go on one of these drive experiences where you sort of play this role of a race car driver. So you're hugging the curves. You're having this really experiential, multi-sensory experience with that brand. Now, next Thursday when you go to work, you activate all those memories inside your brain. And that drive to work gets a little less mundane. So it gets a little less like you're sitting in traffic. You've got these other roles, these other memories being activated with that brand. So it has the ability to actually heighten that core product. So I told you, I promised you we would talk about the brain. And we're going to start with this first spot. So I'm going to keep this cheat sheet up in the top right for you guys. So if you guys do get lost in the presentation, we're going to work through this model step by step. And we're going to start up here in how customer engagement leverages the core product. And everyone, when you come up with these perceptions of brands, you create these nodes inside your memory. So each time you interact with something, you're creating these little wrinkles inside your brain. And there's a couple of things that contribute to your perceptions of the product. The first one is just true product performance. So exactly how that product performed for you. And this is things like product attributes, so what actually defines that product for you. And then utility, how well did it work? Did it give you what you needed out of that product? The second thing, so if you're a beer drinker, and stick with beer, I guess, tonight, and you take a drink of a beer and it's in a paper bag, you're drawing primarily on just this, true product performance. So your satisfaction and your value that you're getting out of that is limited to just these couple of nodes down here. Once you take that bag off that bottle of beer and you reveal the brand, you're activating a whole nother set of memories for yourself. So you're activating things like brand reputation or status, things that go along with that, that enhances the value. Now that beer just tasted a little bit better, and they've actually done studies on this. It's in beer and soda, both of which, once you reveal the brand, increases the value of that consumption. This third type of memory is experiential memories. So these are very rich nodes and connections inside your brain. And so when you have an experiential memory, when you have one of these drive experiences, you're actually remembering things like roles. You're remembering social connections, so who was with you in that moment. These emotions become activated. These multi-sensory memories, so things like sight, taste, sound, smell. All of this creates this richer memory inside the brain. So it's a stronger set of associations, which means you're going to not only recall that brand better, but in more instances. So now you start thinking about hanging out with your buddies, and that activates thoughts of Budweiser beer. So you've got these other categories that are going to bring that product into your mind. Yeah? Roles. Okay, yeah, so we talked about the BMW example. So your typical role when you're driving your car is just yourself, who you really are in reality. But you go on this drive experience, and you transform yourself into a race car driver or something like this. This very different person than who you are in normal life. And so you've got these different perceptions and associations with it. So we're going to keep going down this brain path and move a little bit into psychology. And we're going to talk about these two systems that I promised you. What's really cool about these two systems is that they're actually housed in your basal ganglia. Does anybody know where that is? I feel like John should answer this question. Where is that, John? All right, so we asked our resident neuroscientist where our basal ganglia is. It is literally the deepest part of your brain. And it's housed, these two systems are housed in that part of your brain for a very specific reason. They are fundamentally essential to your survival. Without these two systems, society starts to fall apart, and so does your decision-making ability. So if these two systems are incredibly important, and I'm telling you engagement builds off of these, we're going to learn how to influence them and how you can actually start making these patterns inside this very, very important part of your brain. Because 30% of your decision-making is made subconsciously. So you're doing this all automatically. And these are the types of things you want to access. So this first system is your social emotional system. These are things like, this supports the overall cooperative society. So I told you if one of these systems breaks down, the society sort of starts to crumble. This is the one. So this is what keeps you working together as a community. Have you ever thought about how amazing it is that we're always figuring out ways to work together as a group? That's actually something that's supported by these very ingrained connections inside of our brain. It's this need for belonging. People want social connections. They're driven to seek out social connections. And that's a huge part of this system. But the other part of this system is entirely emotional. Emotions are one of the most powerful drivers of your behavior. They're incredibly difficult to ignore. And they can literally drive you to do irrational things. And they do this for a reason. So when you receive a benefit from someone, you are driven to reciprocate that benefit. But you don't really need to pay that person back. There's no formal contract. There's no real reason for you to pay them back. But if you don't, you actually start to feel negative emotions. You'll start to feel guilt or embarrassment. That's all part of this system to keep people working together. This second system, cognitive regulatory system, serves a very similar purpose in motivating our survival, making sure you can function, but it's more on the individual level. So every day, this new study was released about 2 years ago, that you're presented with over 30,000 ads. Now, what would happen if you literally tried to understand all 30,000 of those ads in one day? You would get literally nothing done. You would never get anything accomplished. So we have this system in place that helps us keep from having overload. So if you were trying to process everything, every piece of information became new information to you, you would never be able to function. And so we've got this system that supports quick decision-making and prevents overload. And it does this through several different mechanisms. One of them, and one we're going to talk quite a bit about today, is habit. So habits are actually there for a survival reason. And a lot of you probably have bad habits, and that this word has definitely gotten a negative connotation over the years. Mine is biting my nails. I apologize if I do it while I'm up here. And you know that they are incredibly difficult to break. But we have 1 million good habits that are helping us get through the day. So when you wake up in the morning, you go through a series of things that you do without even thinking. It gets you moving every single morning. Whatever your routine is, you can keep that to yourself, but they keep you moving and keep you functioning in an efficient manner. And the second one is top-of-mind awareness. So you cannot hold all your memories in the forefront of your brain at all times. So what the brain does is it pushes some into your long-term memory and keeps some up in the forefront into your short-term memory, where it's easily accessible, it's easily drawn on. And this top-of-mind awareness is incredibly useful for companies. So it's what drives that last-minute decision in the grocery store. What are you going to go with? Oh, I just saw an ad. I just saw an ad for Tide. I'm going with Tide. It's a very strong system for you guys to activate. So now we're moving right along. So we're shifting over into the types of outcomes that you can have through engagement. We've talked about how it works, what psychological systems are driving it, and now we're talking about what it actually does and why this is cool. So we're going to talk about 2 types of loyalty today. I'm going to keep referencing them and keep bringing them up. So again, we'll get a nice definition of what the 2 are. Behavioral loyalty. So behavioral loyalty is sort of your baseline loyalty. And it's regularly purchasing your product over time. So someone who comes in and patronizes you repeatedly. This other type of loyalty, attitudinal loyalty, is internalizing positive feelings about the brand, and it's actually internalizing the brand itself. So you are now incorporating that into who you are, this very strong attitudinal loyalty towards the brand. When you first start out, you've got a new offering, you have no loyalty. No one knows who you are, you barely have awareness. So you start in this bottom right-hand corner. You don't want to stay here long. You definitely want to start moving up and to the left as fast as possible. One thing you can do is start to build behavioral loyalty. Just get them to buy your product again. You got them to try it, buy it again, buy it again, buy it again. This type of loyalty is called spurious loyalty. If you stay here, if you never move anywhere from just repeat purchasing, it's spurious loyalty. And the reason we call it spurious is because it's easily broken by competitors. So it's the most fragile type of loyalty. Someone's just repeating it, and maybe they're just repeating it because there's no one else offering that same product. So you want to shift out of this box. Once you get in here, you want to keep moving into a stronger type of loyalty. You can also go from no loyalty to only attitudinal loyalty, to only this emotional attachment to the brand. Now, there are a few brands who have done this, and that's places like Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson has this incredible fan base that's very attitudinally loyal to them, so will tell you the most wonderful things, but they won't buy the product. So these are these raving fans that aren't financially supportive to you. So they're not really the best you can get. They're helping you. In both of these quadrants are both helping you. But where you really want to be is this true loyalty. So true loyalty is the combination of these two things. It's someone who is financially supportive and a brand advocate. So they're pushing you into other customers' hands, but they're also providing this financial benefit to you. So how does engagement play into this? So activity-based loyalty is going to help push you towards more behavior. Activity-based engagement is going to push you towards more behavioral loyalty. It's creating habits, repeat interactions with your brand. It's going to help you along this path to behaviorally loyal customers. Attitudinal loyalty is driven primarily through experiential engagement. So to create those emotions, to even activate those emotions you need to create this type of attachment, you need to create these types of experiences. And as we keep shifting, I'm going to move back into experiential engagement to talk about this process a little further. We're going to go shift into this and talk about what experiential engagement is, your fourth definition of the night. You guys are, I think, only going to get till you can count on one hand, and then we're done with definitions. But experiential engagement is driving pleasurable events, pleasurable experiences outside of the core transaction. So again, over in Derek's world. So these real events for your customers. And there are several types that are very, very effective. This first one is sensory. So activating as many senses as possible. Your senses, and I think you maybe have all heard this at some point while you were going to school, but if you read something and you listen to something, you're creating better memories inside your brain. The same is true. Every time you activate a sense, it's creating a stronger memory inside your brain. There are affective events, so emotional events, creative events, things that stretch people's perceptions of things or challenge their abilities. Behavioral lifestyle events. So Derek talked about several lifestyle events. The Texas State Fair, huge lifestyle event. Driving around those tracks, huge lifestyle event. And then this last one is really cool. So this last one is social identity experiences. So these are events that are incredibly self-relevant, but they're stretching who you are. So they're stretching you to another possible self. And these are incredibly effective at building brand advocates. Because what you want to do is when they stretch themselves, you want part of that stretch to include your brand. And the reason you want this is because once you've stretched your brand into who they feel they are, the way you define yourself is incredibly enduring. It's very hard to switch that once you've made that commitment. And what's really cool about this is that once you have defined who you are, you start pursuing both self-reinforcing behaviors and self-defending behaviors. So say you're an avid Apple customer. If someone speaks poorly about Apple, you're likely to defend Apple. It doesn't make sense to do that until you think about this type of relationship. You want to defend who you are because that's your core psychological self, and that's where that comes from. So it works through this social emotional system, and it works through these very core emotions. Gratitude, surprise. Surprise is an incredibly important portion of how these events work. So spontaneous events, which is what Budweiser has become so fabulous at, is a huge part of this. You cannot activate some of these emotions without first having an element of surprise, an element of spontaneity. And it creates this emotional attachment and this customer identification we just talked about. So as with every strategy, there's always pros and cons. So there's always good things, there's always bad things. You're always going to have to make trade-offs. You cannot just pursue everything. I'm sure all of you know that because you're in jobs where people are counting every dollar you spend or forcing you to account for every dollar you spend. And so we're going to start with pros. We'll start with the good things about this. And we'll move into the cons because you have to at least acknowledge them. The pros are that they build attitudinal loyalty, this emotional attachment to the brand. Attitudinal loyalty is 2 times more successful at building word of mouth than behavioral loyalty. So this is where you get your brand advocates. This is how you transform them into someone who's going to speak highly about your brand to your friends. This next one is that it creates brand community. So I talked about that need for connection, that need to belong. These events enable that need for belonging. So they actually bring people together on a common cause, that your brand. And what better common cause than your brand? So once you've done that, you have this core group of people that are not only selling to each other, they're helping each other experience the brand. They're teaching them how to use it. They're acculturating people to the brand community. They're showing them how to be cool within this brand community. And these are the types of things you can enable in experiential engagement. This final one is very important, is that it's motivated by this social psychological system. So it's motivated by something that's so instinctual to how you behave and how you make decisions that it's incredibly powerful and harder to fight. And it forces you to have real motivation to interact with the brand. And then we talked a little bit about self-transformation. The cons, so the bad news. The bad news is that these are much larger investments. Derek focused on this. It's okay, yeah. It's okay. Derek deals with this all day long. He knows. We've got to make the argument for this big engagement. Rebecca dealt with this in her former career. And it's much harder to measure. So you're putting on this very big experience. There's a couple of risks that go along with this. One is that if you deploy this incorrectly, if you deploy this to the wrong type of product or the wrong type of customer, it can disrupt habitual loyalty, so behavioral loyalty, and actually cause someone to seek a different company as their provider. So it literally sparks cognitive processing where you didn't want to. You wanted to keep them on that habit loop, keep them buying your product without thinking about it, and then you stop that, and you're forcing them to look elsewhere. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there are different types of experiential engagement. And a very good example of one that's not a live event is Bing and Jay-Z. So if you type that into YouTube, it's going to pull up what I call vicarious experiential engagement. So it's enabling social media to have what would be considered a live event, but entirely online. And what Budweiser is doing, because it is incredibly difficult to continually produce live events, is they're going through vicarious consumption. They're creating these videos where they're highlighting the emotional connection. They're highlighting the surprise element to reach that broader audience with their live event. So they're sort of pushing off of that. But that's actually a really good thing. And then actually we're going to talk about how to make these scalable and show a couple of examples of how to make them scalable, because that's something you run into a very big problem with these, is knowing how to reach more than just the 100 people you invited to this event. But yeah, that's a very, very good point. The last risk you have in this is that it can trigger unfairness. So if you invite the wrong set of customers, or if you deploy this improperly, so you are sort of distasteful and you invite, this one guy and then you don't invite his neighbor, and this guy's bragging about this really cool event, he's also very loyal to your brand, you can create bystander effects, where you now, over your portfolio of customers, may have a net negative impact. So you may have just decreased your effects over the course of your customers. So that being said, now that we know the pros and cons, you can start to make more informed strategic decisions. And one of these is who to target. So Derek actually segued very nicely into this, so thank you. One group of customers that's very beneficial for you to target are potential brand advocates, which I call market mavens. Derek, you were calling these influencers or experts? Influencers and experts. Okay, so a market maven is someone who raves about an industry. So they literally know everything there is to know. He was talking about moms groups with minivans. Every industry now has market mavens. It doesn't matter what you do. Somewhere online, they're blogging about the best products within that industry. And those are the people you want to contact. They have the voice and the reach to make that impact as a brand advocate. The other type of customer is a high CLV customer. So someone who could be potentially very profitable to your brand. Now, the second thing we talked about good and bad taste with these types of events, it's when to actually deploy them. So one place may be with one of these high CLV customers, if you see a plateau in their transactional activity, if you've noticed that they haven't been buying lately, this may be a good way to shift them from that behavioral loyalty up into this other plane of loyalty. So get that emotional connection going. And then the second is recognition of status or good behavior. And this is also one where there's a window of appropriate time to engage. So if you're too far after, it's just like if you're training a puppy. If you reward them too far after what they've done, they have no idea why you're getting that reward. So you have this window of time after this good behavior to deploy one of these experiential engagement strategies and have it be very, very effective. Oh, thought I lost my clicker for a minute. Okay, so Sally, coming back to one of your questions. So we're back on Whatever USA. So here is the mayor of Whatever USA. So for those of you who have not heard of this campaign, Budweiser actually built a city, I think it was in Blue Springs, Colorado. It's hard now when you throw out trivia facts because people have their phones and double check you. So I think it is Blue Springs, Colorado. But where they built a city entirely around Bud Light. The whole city was blue. And then this is the real kicker, they gave people plane tickets, told them had no idea where they were going, and flew them to the city for 3 days, where they underwent a series of ridiculous and entertaining events that they had no idea they were invited to or no idea what was going to happen. So they had this huge, spontaneous event in Blue Springs, Colorado. And then one of the things, where we get back to scalable, so Budweiser found that one of their biggest experiential engagement strategies was their brewery tours. How many of you have gone on a brewery tour before? Oh, that's actually very impressive for up here, because there's really only 2 places you can do it, St. Louis and Jacksonville. And so you're really limited. What? Oh, well, Mike, how many of you have gone on a Budweiser brewery tour? All right, there we go. That's what I needed to know. Okay, good. So it's actually really hard to capture an audience. So what Budweiser did to answer this scalable problem was they created the mobile brew tour, where they take everything that was in that brewery tour and they take it to state fairs, or they take it to these events where they find a mass audience and they recreate that experience. So this is one firm's answer to how to be scalable. If you look really closely, that's me and my husband in the bottom right corner. One other thing that they do well are these two bottom squares, and that's making things shareable. So not only did they make it shareable, they gave you this hashtag right here, but they promoted sharing of your experience by setting up little photo booths. This is a Christmas card. You stand in front of it, and then you Instagram it. That's kind of the idea. And they made this a shareable event, which is another key element to these types of strategies. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're talking about this totally different psychological system, totally different strategy for engagement. We're back down on the bottom of our model. We'll start with our definition. So activity-based engagement is the use of interactions to influence customers' cognitive processing. So your main goal with this is to activate a habit loop. So how many of you have heard of the term habit loop? Okay, a habit loop is you get a cue, you do this certain routine, and then you get a reward. And you just keep doing that. Every time you get that cue, you do that same routine over and over again. So that's what you're trying to do here. Some examples of this type of engagement are user-generated content. So going online and writing about your brand. Tutorials, blogging, writing reviews, checking in, tweets, Facebook, activities and interactions with your brand. So this works through that cognitive regulatory system we were talking about. Your system for not overloading. And we talked about habits, so these habit loops, cue, routine, reward. It also promotes learning. So this engagement promotes learning by just actually reading content from your firm, but also learning from each other, learning from other customers. You're engaging. You're learning not just how to use the product, you're learning how to be a part of this brand community. And those are all very important lessons. And then this last one is heuristic processing. Heuristic processing is just shortcuts. You have a shortcut for how you make decisions, and it's automatic. So you're constantly making these automatic decisions. All right, now for the pros and cons. Pros. So this builds behavior loyalty that is supported by your cognitive regulatory system. So it's operating subconsciously. So the way you can think of this is it's like an annuity. Once you plant the seed of this, it's going to keep paying off in little increments over time. So that's really promising. That's really nice for your brand. You want people like that. They're kind of your stability when it comes to financial performance. This one directly affects financial performance. So this one is where you're going to get your repeat purchasers. And the last one is that it provides that fundamental wealth of data. So it provides this totally complementary profile of who your customer is when they're not making a transaction. And that's incredibly beneficial to you as a brand. So the cons, you get this very low emotional involvement that can easily be broken. If you only stay at this behavioral loyalty, a competitor can come in and really steal them away. They don't have any connection or attachment to you. They're just buying you out of habit. It can create feelings of dependence. So let's see. Where's my Microsoft guy? This was my one example. So we had Clinton. There you are. And one thing that Microsoft has actually created this dependence with their customers, so it creates this sort of lock-in feeling. And that actually can be a little hard for customers to swallow. So you have a little bit of a potential negative here. And the last one is there's no active, proactive motivation. So people aren't seeking your brand out. They're just doing this subconsciously. So again, now that we know these pros and cons, we can correctly identify who you should target with these. And some of these are newly acquired customers. So your newly acquired customers, you want to just get them to keep buying. You want them to come back in the store repeatedly. You want them to learn more about your brand. Potential customers. So getting your customers, people who haven't yet made a transaction, to interact with your brand is beneficial for you in the long run. You're going to start building that foundation of awareness, that foundation of expertise of your brand. When? You want to do this early in the life cycle. So it's easy to start doing this, build this foundation for them. And the other one is more of a who again, but which types of products, and products that you repeatedly buy will profit a little more from this because you're creating the same habit you want in their purchasing behavior in their interactions with you. So Express is one of the leaders in how they do this. So what they've done, and the firms that are doing this very, very well, are overlaying this on their existing loyalty programs. So they have this infrastructure in place to be tracking people. Now they're tracking things that are more effective and more insightful than ever before. So they've, over the top of their loyalty program, which used to just track how much you bought, how often you bought it, they're giving you welcome gifts. So down here, if you follow them on Twitter, you get 50 points. You can only do that once, so you get kind of a high point bump. If you review an item, you get 10 points. If you opt in to receive text messages, you get 100 points. So another welcome gift, another reason to sign up. And then if you check into the store, every time you do that, you're going to get 10 points. So just for checking in, you don't even have to shop. If you're walking by Express, you just scan your phone, and it checks you in. So this is telling you people who are coming into your store that maybe aren't making purchases but are still engaged with your brand. They're still making that visit to them. You're just not converting that into sales, which is something very insightful for your brand. So now we've introduced you to both of these. We're going to pull it all together. I promised you that these could create synergies that were explosive on the way that they affect your brand. So let's talk about how this happens. So if you look down the left, you've got sort of stages of loyalty. You've got just plain awareness, behavioral, attitudinal, and then true loyalty, this holy grail of loyalty. And then on the bottom, you've got customers on their journey, so over time interacting with you. At first, you can deploy activity-based engagement just to build awareness and then to start creating those beneficial habits. And then somewhere along the line, if you introduce an experiential engagement, that's going to lift that trajectory, change that loyalty trajectory to this much more positive route. So up into this attitudinal loyalty. It can enhance these everyday interactions. So if you watch what happens here, so these activity-based engagements, if there was no experiential engagement, would continue moving them along this smaller path. once you shift that up, you've had this experiential engagement, those same activity-based engagement strategies, things like asking them to Instagram, getting them to post something to Facebook, those help you keep them down this brand advocate path by, one, forcing them to relive that engagement, forcing them to activate all those experiential memories, and two, giving them a channel to enable that brand advocacy. So now they want to talk about your brand. They've just shifted into this brand advocate trajectory, and you've given them the means to do that. You've told them exactly how to make that impact. What's very interesting on this, though, is if you continue down on this path and you stop your activity-based engagement, you risk actually having these journeys deteriorate. So this is kind of like if you have no maintenance, they can fall off and get swept away by someone else. Okay, you guys are through the theory section. Was it painful? Okay, good. Some of you don't want to respond, so that's fine. I will just take that as true. Behavior is not necessarily a requirement because you can get latent loyalty. So that was a very good question. You can get people who are very attitudinally loyal to you that aren't making purchases. So that is kind of a little misleading on that path. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Right? Yeah. Yeah. But you can still have like behaviorally loyal patterns where you're still interacting with that brand. And like Harley Davidson now has product categories where you can actually be behaviorally loyal without buying the motorcycle. So you can buy like, the, I don't know, headband or jacket or something like that. So that's a big part of it. But yeah. Oh, I bet. That's actually a great example. And still financially supporting them so they get to go out and make some sort of purchase towards the brand. So that's a very good example. Okay, any other questions? Clinton? Mm-hmm. That's a very, very good example. And actually, Burberry kind of ran into the same thing where their plaid was getting knocked off and people were buying all these products with them. And this is a huge part of targeting. So if you're building this experiential brand and you're focusing a lot on the sort of fluffy side of your product, then managing how those people see it, a lot of brands will do something which is a little bit smarter, and they'll introduce a brand extension. So it would be something like Gap did this. So Gap is their core customer group, the average person. And then they have Old Navy, and then they have Banana Republic. And so it protects those brands. So now Gap isn't diluted by Old Navy, and Banana Republic isn't threatened by Gap or Old Navy. But they're all the same company. They're all doing that. And that probably would have been a smarter strategy for them to really keep that experiential investment worth it. Yeah, very good example. All right, should we dive into phase 2 of customer engagement? Okay, we're shifting gears a little bit. So we can review this very quickly. There's 2 main pathways. We've got 2 psychological systems driving them. One's enhancing the core product, and one is directly affecting performance. So we're on to phase 2, which is the 3 steps of engineering effective engagement. We're going to talk about generating data-driven insights. We're going to tell you sort of some effective ways to figure out what type of strategy to pursue. Then we're going to look at how to use those insights, this data-driven insight, and these new theories that you now have. You're all kind of empowered by all these new theories to design your engagement program, so on this very strong foundation. And then in the end, we're going to show you how to test this and implement it. So before you roll anything out to your total customer base, we'll show you why you should test it and how you can test it, so you don't make any big faux pas. So this first step is generating data-driven insights. And there's two main ways that you can do this. And one's qualitative, focus groups, interviews, observations, journey mapping. These are all words, images, things like that. Rich descriptions of people's behaviors, people's thoughts, people's feelings. Quantitative. So quantitative is crunching numbers, modeling, these big, heavy data analysis. It's going to fall down here in this quantitative. We're going to talk about 3 approaches. There are a lot of quantitative approaches. We're going to focus on these 3 because they're incredibly useful for customer engagement. These next steps is actually designing the whole process. So once you've got these data-driven insights, you want to pump that into the decisions, the strategic decisions you make to build your program. And this first one is just selecting the type that fits your products or fits your customers in the mix. So you're probably going to end up with a little bit of both. You probably aren't going to focus entirely on one and just neglect the other. And then steps in designing these 2 types of strategies. So each one, because they're so vastly different from each other, they have different structures that really support them. And we'll identify some of these. And then we're going to look at targeting and cadence. So cadence is literally the frequency with which you engage your customers. So how often and what's the gap in it. And then testing and implementing. So we'll teach you how to test these strategies before you roll it out to your customer base. And then we'll show you a couple of things on how to implement them to your further customer base. All right, I gave you guys another cheat sheet because I know listening to me talk for a very long time. I hope all of you did your homework at the networking where I was pushing you towards the food and drink so you're not getting too exhausted. But you'll have your little cheat sheet up to the right to keep you moving. So qualitative research is very, very exploratory. It's a good place to start when you just don't know where to start. It's kind of introducing you to your customers. And a lot of times you don't know your customers very well at all, especially if you're in a little bit higher up role. If you're not a frontline employee, you start to lose touch with who those people are. Qualitative has a lot of strengths. Some of them are that you get to observe people's behavior. You also get to ask them what they're doing, but those 2 things can be vastly different at times. So you can interview or host interviews or host focus groups. These are good for things like thinking, feeling, doing questions. Things like getting into the mind of your customer. You can just ask them what they're doing. And then journey mapping. Journey mapping is one that's very unique to customer engagement. Journey mapping is following your customer over the entire course of their interactions with your brand. So you want to have that complete map from when they first became aware to their first purchase to their last purchase and the follow-up service that went with that. And this is going to give you a wealth of information when implementing customer engagement strategies because you now have a list of touch points, moments where you could really define that journey. And so that can be a really beneficial strategy for you. Now your objective here is to search for ways to match engagement to your specific customer needs. We're going to talk about how this plays out in the 2 different types in just a minute. The process for this is first pick your method. So different methods offer different benefits than each other. So observation is a very good one to find out what people are actually doing. Sometimes it's not that they're withholding information from you, but many times they can't articulate it to you. Or, and what's really important for activity-based strategies, it's a habit, and they're doing these things subconsciously, so they don't realize they're doing it in the first place. So observation can be an incredibly wealthy place to start for you. The second one is identify your samples. Sampling in qualitative research is very different than sampling in quantitative research. When you're sampling for quantitative research, you are getting as generalizable as you possibly can. You want to get as many different people as you possibly can that's representative of your customers. In qualitative, you're looking for theoretically interesting informants. So you're looking for people that may give you those surprise insights. So in the case of engagement, a good place to start might be your advocates. If you can track these people down and find out what their journey was, there's a good chance that you can recreate that with other customers. Another thing is you could also look at your lost customers. What turned them off? What deactivated them to your brand? In many cases, you're going to want to do both of these. You're going to want to look for theoretically opposite people and study them in detail. The last step of this is coding and analyzing the data for themes. So you're looking for things that are repetitive, that are coming up multiple times across these different customers. You can do this in a couple of different ways. So you can do this visually. So you've seen these, I think they're called word maps, where they're big circles that kind of indicate how prominent a word was spoken in a body of text. You can do this through summary. And these last two are actually technologies that can enable you to search the text. So I really like NVivo. This one's actually very user-friendly. I've never used Atlas, but I'm sure it's just as good. And they're actually very powerful systems. So what you really want, your final deliverable from this, is different for your experiential and cognitive, or experiential and activity-based, because of these two different systems. So in experiential, you're looking for emotional and social processing opportunities. So what you're trying to find are people who have very rich memories that involve your brand. So if you're Prego and someone tells you a story about how much of a role that pasta sauce plays in their family dinners, you've discovered an experiential memory that's part of that customer's experience. If that starts replicating to multiple customers, that might be something you want to try to create in your experiential campaign. You're looking for unique memories that are beneficial to your brand. And they exist within your customer base already, right now. You just have to find them through these sort of data-driven insights. In activity-based, you're looking for cognitive processing opportunities. You're looking to find the start of your habit loop. So you want to see what cue triggers your customer to buy your product. So there's actually a really great story that goes along with this. So how many of you use Febreze? Okay, Febreze was almost a $100 million mistake for P&G. So they bought this technology, this chemical that would eliminate odor. They thought they won the bad smell game. They thought they won this air freshener game. They're like, oh, this is out of the park. We don't even need to do anything to sell this. It will sell itself. So they started with interviews, and they asked people how they would use this. And they came up with this campaign to go out and do this. It was a total flop. They actually are using this campaign right now, which is very interesting. So they said they would use it to cover up bad smells. So they did this, and people bought one bottle of Febreze, and then they never rebought. And so something wasn't quite there. They weren't actually figuring out how to make that repurchase the product. They called back all their test people. They had a lot of housewives that they sent this product to and asked them to use it. And they asked, why are you not rebuying this product? And they said, oh, I forgot about it. I have it. It's sitting on my shelf. I love it, but I've completely forgotten about it. So they took a totally different strategy. And this is a great example because it tells you that the choices you make here when you pick your method have serious repercussions on the insights you're going to get. And so what they did is they asked another group of housewives if they could install video cameras in your home. Now, some of us probably would never allow anyone to do this, me included probably. And they did this, and they recorded everything they did when they were cleaning the house. And they just watched endless footage of people cleaning their homes. And what do you think they found? What do you do when you clean your house? Do you have a system? Do you have a pattern? So these housewives would go in and they'd vacuum, they'd dust, they'd make the bed, they'd smooth it out, and they'd take that bottle of Febreze and spritz it at the end. So P&G was selling this as a starter product. Start with this, eliminate your odors. But the problem was it was a finishing touch to someone's hard work. It was actually the reward for a habit loop. So once they identified their role in that habit loop, they were able to completely activate this cognitive processing system. And since then, they have been that huge home run product for the company. And now they're using the do you smell like a cat campaign, which was what their first try was at this. Right, it was, so the reason they did that is the same. So you cannot be rewarded with nothing. So if you are smelling nothing, you haven't actually activated that habit. You're not in it. You're not part of it. So they had to add that smell. It's the same reason why shampoo suds. So they added the suds because it's your reward for shampooing the hair. It doesn't need the suds at all. If you go and make your own shampoo, they tell you to use beer or something. And there's no suds in that. Yeah, but very good. Thank you. Okay, generating quantitative insights takes a very different approach. So quantitative insights are looking at deductive analysis. So it's when you come in with an idea or a theory. So theory seems kind of like a scary word that only psychologists use, but it's just working theories. You have an idea of how something works. You want to see if this plays out over time. So when Febreze came up with this, they wanted to see if that was going to play out across a broader audience. So you do this to make sure that those little tiny insights that you gathered from that sample of 25 people are going to generalize to the hundreds of thousands of customers you want it to work on. So you use these methods like multivariate choice and optimization models. Each one has different benefits. Each one has different roles in this process. Your main objective is to test the validity of these ideas. So your process, again, depends on the question. You're going to pick your sampling approach, very, very different from the qualitative approach, where you want it to be generalizable. You want to make it as parallel to who your customer base is right now. So you have the same general makeup. And this is where the probability type sampling comes in. So that's kind of the scary statistics that everyone tries to avoid. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people. Or what's very cool about quantitative is you can use existing data. So a lot of you you're sitting on a mountain of data. You just don't know how to pull those insights out of it. And so you already have this CRM system. You've got data points from how they're interacting with your brand online. That collects itself. So you are literally collecting data that could give you insights right now. And then you need to analyze this in some way. So you have a couple of different deliverables. Each one offers a different deliverable. One is to just tell you what drives outcomes. So what's driving sales? What's driving advocacy? The second one is which customers are your most effective targets? So who do you go after? How do you identify potential advocates? And this third one is how to best optimize your resources. This is actually more appropriate a little later in the stage, but we're going to cover it now. And so this first one was multivariate. So multivariate is your basic regression. Do you guys remember regression? Does that bring back bad memories for some of you? This can actually test the effectiveness of activity-based and experiential strategies at predicting an outcome. What's really cool about this is that it determines which strategies matter and how much they matter. So they're going to tell you, relative to everything else you're doing, how much something matters. What I like to call this is auditioning strategies. You can also do this with auditioning data points. So when you start collecting this huge mountain of data, you can't store all that. You can't make sense of all of that. So you run these models to figure out what's important to the decision that you want, or to the outcome that you're studying, so to sales, to advocacy. A benefit is that you can use past data. You don't have to collect data. This is much less expensive and much faster, and you're just sitting there on this stuff that could be very useful to you. Another big benefit is that you can test a large number of strategies at once. You can plug all of this into a model and come up with insights. So walk through a little example of this. So regression is a formula like this. Lots of additions and minuses. And this one right here would be if you plugged in experiential strategy A, experiential activity strategy A, another activity strategy, and another experiential strategy, and what was the impact on customer lifetime value. What this is telling you is that these two strategies are winners. These are actually helping your brand. This one, activity strategy B, is hurting your brand. So something must have happened. It must have irritated your customer, or it must have deactivated something that was positive. And then this last one, experiential strategy B, has no impact. It's not doing anything for your brand. So these last two are losers. These two you want to stop investing in. Because if you're investing in something that does nothing, you're literally pouring money down the drain. And you obviously don't want to invest in something that's harming your brand. The second type of data analysis is choice modeling. So choice modeling is an incredibly powerful tool in that it gives you the probability of someone making a choice, the individual, the actual one person making a specific choice. Will they join a program or will they not? Will they drop your program or will they not? It actually assesses things based on all the factors you want to look at. So you can put in things like price, brand attributes, all the different strategies, the frequency of your strategy. And then the objective is to determine which elements of engagement are most important for driving the favorable choice. So whichever the favorable choice is, it's always yes or no, choice or no choice. And it identifies your most promising target. So the second one is really, really useful. So what you're going to get out of this is a probability of that customer making a choice. It's going to range from 0 to 1. So 0, you're not at all likely to do it. 1, you're almost definitely going to do it. And what's kind of tricky about this is those two people are not really your true target because you don't really have a lot of influence over their choice. They're almost guaranteed to make one or the other. What you're looking for are the people in the center, the people who you can actually influence and sway, hopefully upwards, towards that favorable choice. So it gives you who to target, and then it gives you this other piece of information, the elasticity of your marketing variables. So how much one of these factors, so all these things you plugged into this model, how much one of those factors affects the probability of you making that choice. So how much if you increase this strategy, does it make it more likely that you're going to make this choice? And you can play with this. You can see which ones matter, how they're going to influence that person. And all this is on the individual level. So very, very powerful thing. Now this last one is our optimization model. This one, unlike multivariate and unlike choice, tells you what works well. So these other two give you sort of strategies that are good, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to invest in those strategies, what trade-offs you need to make to maximize your benefits and minimize your costs. And to do that, we try to find this optimal level to be deployed. And this is best used after you've actually chosen your plan. So you use these other two to make your decisions, after you've auditioned everything, after you've determined your targets through your choice model. And then you use optimization models to really calibrate your strategy based on maximum benefit. You determine this optimal mix and investment based on segments within your customer base. So you can do this based on each target that you have within your broader customer base. So it's not this general working model, which wouldn't be as effective. Your benefits is that you can optimize investments to maximize outcomes. You can customize strategies based on targeting factors. I'm going to walk through a little bit of an example. This is a project that we're actually working on with Derek. It's not exactly what we're doing with DriveShop, but it's very, very similar. So what we would do is look at the engagement strategies employed in the firm and how that affects performance. But then we would take into account all these other factors that can influence this relationship and then optimize that. So then what you would get in the end is this nice little model that you can plug in the features of your customers, and it'll tell you the optimal investments over here to get the maximum output over here. So it's kind of like the winning algorithm that you want to have to minimize your costs and maximize your benefits. Okay, and then finally, selecting your type and mix. So we're going to come back to this matrix again. So now that you guys know about what these 4 cells are and the different types of loyalty within these cells, how do you actually deploy engagement to shift them to that upper left-hand corner? So your first step is to audit your customer loyalty, to understand where you stand with your customers right now, your basic foundational level of loyalty. If you find that you're down here in low, sad news. You want to first try to shift yourself over into this behavioral loyalty. You're going to use activity-based engagement to do this. Just shift them over. Oops, going backwards. You can also use activity-based engagement to shift those latently loyal people over into this true loyalty square. So start shifting them into that winning category. Then if you end up that you're down here and you're in this sort of low attitudinal loyalty but high behavioral loyalty, and you want to start having those people who are financially great customers selling your brand for you, you're going to want to try and deploy an experiential strategy. shift them, make those emotional connections with that brand, build on, they're already loyal to you, build on that to really maximize your benefit from those customers. And then, of course, here is that holy grail I keep talking about, true loyalty. Now, when you use these two strategies together, your activity-based engagement after an experiential engagement can force you to relive that experience. We talked about all those nodes. Once you activate that node, even if it's just some little interaction with the brand, it can help you feel those feelings again. It can help you imagine those roles you played in that event. And it can create opportunities for advocacy. And then experiential after advocacy helps shift them up. So that same little arrow we had. And it helps do this by creating meaning and building relational ties between customers. Okay, it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. So these are all in your packets. I'm going to hit on a few of the highlights, but each one of these has very specific structural elements that are keys to their success. Now, activity-based is very similar to loyalty programs in that you can really get them to work well when you have them incentivized and when you're tracking them. Because in marketing, if you can't track it, you can't influence it. So this is a very, very powerful structure for building activity-based loyalty. To get them to be tracked, you want to introduce a welcome gift. So if you remember in that Express example, we saw a lot of welcome gifts, reasons for them to sign up to text messaging, those things. It doesn't always have to be money or points. It can be things like status or exclusive offers. You want your customers to build an electronic profile. And you want to do this for a very specific reason, because once you've done that, that's self-reported information about them. You've identified them. And once you've identified them, you can connect them to other forms of data and start profiling them. You want these incentives. So habits, just like training that puppy, when you give a reward, you're more likely to get them to repeat that system again. You want transparent rules. Transparent rules are very important in this stage because it helps to alleviate bystander effect. When people know how they got to another status level, they're less jealous of them. They have less feelings of unfairness. And it also provides an exit strategy. So when you have, if this does go wrong, if you accidentally deploy something that's not good for your brand, you want a way to get out. And there are companies who have done that poorly before and have sort of given away a lot of points without having any benefit. And then you want these preset milestones and expirations. So this is where you start building the cadence of your activity-based strategy. So if you have preset milestones, you have goals to move towards. So you're getting them pushed towards these increments. It helps keep them motivated. People are incredibly motivated by slightly attainable goals. So you don't want them too attainable, it's too easy. You don't want them too hard, it's demotivating. So getting those milestones right is very critical. Getting the cadence, the expiration set right is very critical. Because you want it in a time frame that's feasible, but not so feasible it's too easy, not so long that it's unattainable. You want to produce a little bit of urgency within your customers. Now, experiential engagement is a totally different game than activity-based engagement. It's playing on those different systems. So the way you actually implement this is incredibly different. So this first one is using specialized targeting. It's very important with these campaigns to find your market mavens, your potential brand advocates, your high CLV customers. Looking for people that are not only big wallets, but big voices. So they're the size of their social network. This is to help you maximize your investment. You want things to be spontaneous. So Ritz-Carlton used to be very spontaneous and create these little rewards when you showed up. And that was great. It was working very, very well to produce gratitude, reciprocity within their customer base. And then when word got out, it actually stopped working as well. People started expecting it. When you expect that benefit, your gratitude transforms into entitlement. And once you've made that shift, you can't get that lift that you could before. Right. For the non-inflation. So part of it is secrecy. So there are some airlines who have been very good at this and keeping their rewards secret. And the others is just spontaneity and deployment. So Priceless. What's the Priceless company? MasterCard. MasterCard has a spontaneous rewards campaign right now, and there is no rhyme or reason for how it's deployed. So once you can figure out how it's deployed, then you get to that entitlement spot. You can tell, oh, it's someone who came in every Saturday and now they get this reward. So you've figured out the system. You've actually, the transparent rules from this side hurt you in this side. So that's why it's very clear distinguishing these two is incredibly important. But yeah, maintaining spontaneity is very difficult. Budweiser, on the other hand, has been able to do this fairly well. They keep having these, but part of it is they make up for it in their multi-sensory experience. So this multi-sensory is the next one on the list. So sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Activate as many senses as possible. Communal. So create groups. There's something that's really cool about how to be successful in creating a community, and that's when you break down existing social roles. So how many of you are runners? I'm a runner, so I always use... Yeah, so if you are a runner, and you go to a 5K, very often people are all wearing the same shirt. Well, that same person standing next to you could be CEO of Starbucks or something like that. But you've broken down that social barrier. And by doing that, you're more likely to build community connections within your brand. So you break down those initial barriers and create stronger connections between your customers. You want it to be self-relevant. We talked about self-transformation. The way to do that is to have places where you can personalize the experience. So knowing the different segments within your customers is incredibly critical in experiential engagement. This promotes customer company identification, which I think is the first time I've said this word out loud, but it is that incorporation, that internalizing of the brand into your self-concept. It's what makes it so enduring and keeps you doing those self-reinforcing behaviors. You want it to be shareable. So this kind of works in two folds. So the first is shareable. It helps you when you go to make that ask for your activity-based engagement. They're more prone to do it. But there are recent studies that show even the act of sharing an experience heightens that experience for you. So capturing something in a photograph turns that into sort of a magical, nostalgic event rather than just this, corporate-sponsored event I went to. That was kind of cool. You can do this through the Instagram photo boost we saw, the Twitter hashtags we saw. And then the one thing that's very critical to this, and what Sally was touching on, is how to make this scalable. So I would recommend looking up Bing and Jay-Z. That was a nice fusing together of that word. It's a great one for how they made an experiential engagement strategy scalable. There's an awesome video on it. And actually, if you want it, you can always email me, and I'll send it to you. I keep going backwards. You guys probably don't want to do that. And then this last step is the timing and cadence of your strategy. I'm pretty sure that's my phone going off right now. It's pretty embarrassing. Targeting, you want to really choose the type of customer. So you're looking at relationship stage. So when in their life cycle with your product is the best time to deploy these things. Looking at your share of their wallet. Can you win them over from their competitors? Their size of voice, the size of their network. Now, cadence is a little tricky, and we're going to talk about this primarily for activity-based strategies. So these are the ones where you're asking multiple times over the course of their journey. Experiential, you can do those multiple times in their journey, but not as frequently. It's just not financially feasible. But cadence also determines the price. So if you start doing these, so like with Ritz-Carlton, if you were to do these too often, all the spontaneity would be lost. So they would expect it every time they come in. So with this cadence, if you look at the customer's lifetime value, how valuable they are to you right now, calculating for how long they'll be a customer and how much they spend with your brand, and you look at the frequency of engagement, you see these little shifts in how people respond. So we've got their responses up along the top. So at first, when you engage them, you build this base level of awareness. And the key to this is that you want to engage them enough to drive positive behaviors, but you don't want to engage them so much that they're ignoring you, and then even worse, disengaging with you. So at first, you're driving awareness. This next one is you're developing learning. So you're creating insight. They're learning a little more about your brand each time you engage with them. And then this third space is where they're truly engaged. They're not only pursuing these activities, but they're actually going forth and looking for other engagement opportunities. Then you reach a point in your frequency when you've gone a little too far, so you're engaging them a little too often, and the customer starts to shut down. So this is the first phase of dissolving this relationship. So it's gotten a little bit too intrusive, and they just do nothing. They do the least possible path of resistance. This is bad for you because you are spending money to send these things out, and you're getting no response. But this is worse. So once you've hit this disengaging phase, it's very likely this is where people start opting out. So they no longer want you to contact you. They're changing their phone numbers. They're moving away. They're getting as far away from you as possible. And once this happens, they're probably telling their friends how awful you are for asking this. We're actually working on a project now about donations for a not-for-profit. And they run into this problem all the time because they need to engage their customers to get that donation stream. But they never want to get to this point where they're disengaging them so much that they are that uncomfortable sort of begging type of perception. So what you want to do is find this, your optimal frequency of engagement, where you can keep that in that very profitable spot for your brand. Okay, testing. We've got, I'm going to go over a little bit. So let's first introduce why you would ever want to test before you roll out. I'll go through one main example, and we'll just skip through because we're running out of time. So engagement gone wrong. I've told you some really bad things can happen if you do this poorly. McDonald's is a prime example of this. How many of you remember the Real Food campaign from McDonald's? They started showing farmers and their cows, and they were trying to tell you, we got this, ammonia slime or whatever from this cow. And they were trying to make these associations. So during the middle of this, they launched this huge engagement campaign to get people talking about how wholesome McDonald's food was. It sounds ridiculous just saying it out loud. And what happened was it got hijacked by a mom's group who attacked McDonald's so fiercely, they shut down all their social media channels. They literally just laid into every tiny little pain point of McDonald's to show how horrible they were, how degrading they were to the children of America, and shut it down because McDonald's gave them this incredible, huge platform for them to have a voice. So they used their own strategy against them. Bad. Not a great outcome for that engagement strategy. So a very big reason to test your strategy on a small scale before you roll it out to your larger customers. Another reason to test is for these possible risks, these possible negative effects. You want to make sure that you're not going to break a habit. So you want to make sure that your customers are not just behaviorally loyal because there's no other competitor in town. So you want to make sure you're not sparking that cognitive processing when all you have is habit driving your sales. You also want to make sure you're not creating these unintentional bystander or unfairness effects. So sheltering the rest of your customer portfolio. So sure, the guy who gets this experiential engagement is happy, but how did the other guys feel? What did you just do to that rest of your portfolio? So to do this, you undergo a series of tests. And this is where you get into your pilot markets. You start your field experiments. So this first step of this is, and the objective of this is to determine the best option, to identify any glitches, and identify any issues before you roll it out to the whole world of your customers. But then this last one is to show evidence of causality. Every one of you has to answer to a boss. It may not be within your company, but it's someone who is making you held accountable for your investments. And this is a great way to show them what you just did actually worked. So it is the best way to show them that. So you're going to start with what we just talked about, the multivariate choice models, this stuff that you can do with the data you already have. You're going to audition a bunch of strategies, and then you're going to choose one. Then what you're going to do is you're going to randomly assign your customers to one of two groups, a control group or a test group. And this control group, so this group on the bottom in the darker purple, they're going to receive no strategy, nothing. This other group is going to receive whatever strategy you've chosen. And so what you get in the end is a lift comparison. So you're going to see how much more, hopefully, the group that you deployed the strategy to actually purchased, or how much more advocacy you see out of this group. And then this final slide, I think, and we're almost done, is developing your implementation strategy. So now that you've proven this works on this small scale, you've got to roll it out to this large scale, and there's a few things you want to make sure happen. So this first thing is developing action items. You want to identify the necessary resources. So what worked on that small scale, you've got to make sure you replicate it everywhere you go. So you need to identify employees. You need to figure out who the responsible parties are. There's logistics involved with this. You may need to reprogram your point of sales. There's signage. So there could be signage and learning for your customers that needs to coincide with the rollout of this program. And there's a lot of training, especially on the experiential engagement side. We're going to talk a little bit about how that's different. So there's a few unique elements when you get into experiential engagement where the training is vastly different from activity. Activity-based, you can roll out with your IT department very often. So you're sort of initiating these pre-planned points of communication and points of contact with your customer. With experiential, there's human behavior involved. So that means you want your event to be perceived as authentic. It's a very key part of this. For that to happen, you have to train your employees on things like emotional management. So things where they can read how people are going. And I think Derek's company actually has a system for selecting people who are good with this. Oh, very good, Ernie. You made the slides. Emotional management. And there are a lot of psychology tests that can help you find people, hire people that are very good at this. You also want your action to be perceived as given under free will or benevolent. So you want them to think that they're doing this on their own, which means you need to empower your customers. So giving them a way to make decisions on the fly so they can create that spontaneity. And then in the end, you'll use those optimization models, that last set of models, to continuously adapt and improve your program. And just a brief review. I'm not going to talk through it because I'm already over time. And Dr. Palmatier, last few minutes.